Picture a fleet of the most advanced stealth bombers ever built, departing from the heart of America under the cover of darkness. There are no announcements, no press briefings, no official acknowledgments. 18 hours of silence stretch across the Atlantic, pass over the Mediterranean, and extend deep into the Middle Eastern night until the sky above a distant plateau ignites with a power the world has rarely witnessed. That event, which unfolded last June during a mission known as Operation Midnight Hammer, was not the conclusion of a story, but rather the prologue. If you believe that what happened then was the definitive end of a long simmering crisis, you have not been paying close attention, because what the United States is undertaking right now, in this very moment as the world watches, makes that first astonishing strike look like a mere warning shot. This is a deep dive into the most significant military campaign the United States has launched in the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq more than 2 decades ago. The operation is codenamed Epic Fury. We are going to walk through every complex layer of this unfolding conflict: the strategic precision strikes, the compelling and sobering satellite imagery, the back-channel signals of surrender, the collapse of diplomatic negotiations, and the international coalition now assembling like a naval vice around the Strait of Hormuz. By the time you finish reading this analysis, you will understand exactly what has occurred, why the implications are staggering, and where the trajectory of this crisis is heading. To fully comprehend the scale and ferocity of Operation Epic Fury, it is essential to first understand the catalyst that preceded it. On June 21, 2025, the United States launched Operation Midnight Hammer. The Secretary of Defense described the mission at the time as a historic undertaking, specifically highlighting it as the longest mission for that particular heavy stealth bomber platform since the year 2001 and the first operational employment of the massive ordnance penetrator, a weapon specifically engineered to destroy targets buried deep beneath mountains and reinforced concrete. 7 of these stealth bombers departed from their base in Missouri, flying an 18-hour round trip across vast oceans. They released 14 of these massive penetrator bombs, each weighing 30,000 pounds, directly onto Iran's most hardened and fortified nuclear sites located at Fordo and Natanz. Simultaneously, a submerged United States submarine launched more than 24 cruise missiles at the nuclear complex near Isfahan. According to analysis compiled by the Congressional Research Service, the entire synchronized strike involved over 125 aircraft and was executed in a window lasting roughly 25 minutes. The outcome was cataclysmic for the target sites. The sitting president announced that evening that the key nuclear enrichment facilities had been completely and totally obliterated. Fordo, a facility buried between 80 and 90 meters under a mountain peak, specifically engineered with concrete covers and blast doors to survive conventional bombing campaigns, was struck by multiple bombers dropping ordnance directly into its ventilation shafts and access tunnels. The initial blasts blew away the protective covers, allowing follow-on munitions to tunnel straight down into the heart of the facility itself. The Center for Strategic and International Studies confirmed that these strikes decimated Iran's enrichment infrastructure and destroyed metallurgy research facilities. Prior to the strike, international inspectors had assessed that Iran had stockpiled enough enriched material to potentially construct up to 9 nuclear devices. That capacity was, at minimum, severely degraded. However, the story grew significantly more complicated in the months that followed. Open-source satellite intelligence and analytical reporting began to tell a troubling story of resilience. By early autumn, officials in Tehran were publicly announcing initiatives to restore their missile production capacity. Commercial satellite imagery from the following spring indicated reinforced tunnel systems, hardened access points, and additional protective construction at military complexes across the country. Iran was not surrendering to the reality of its destruction. Iran was actively rebuilding. Simultaneously, the last vestiges of nuclear diplomacy collapsed entirely. Iran suspended cooperation with international atomic inspectors. 5 separate rounds of high-stakes nuclear talks between Washington and Tehran failed to produce any substantive agreement or even a framework for de-escalation. It was also revealed that Iran had successfully stored a cache of highly enriched uranium in an underground facility that had not been damaged by the June bombings. During a major address to Congress in late February of 2026, the president stood before the nation and declared that Iran had restarted its nuclear weapons program and was actively developing missiles capable of threatening the American homeland. 3 days later, the bombs began falling again, but this time with an entirely different strategic objective. On February 28, 2026, the United States Central Command, in coordination with Israeli forces, launched Operation Epic Fury. It stands as the most extensive American military undertaking in the region since the invasion of Iraq. According to defense analysts at prominent think tanks, the stated objectives were unambiguous from the first hour: destroy Iran's ballistic missile arsenal and production capacity, annihilate its naval forces, sever its logistical and financial support for proxy terrorist networks, and ensure the nation never acquires a nuclear weapon. While regime change was not formally listed as an official objective on briefing slides, it was widely understood and telegraphed as the ultimate strategic ambition of such a comprehensive dismantling campaign. The commander of United States Central Command described the scale of the operation in a statement that left no room for misinterpretation. He noted that since the first 24 hours of the campaign, Iranian ballistic missile and drone attacks had dropped drastically. However, he was equally clear that the mission was not a defensive one. The forces executing Operation Epic Fury, he stated, are not just defending against threats. They are methodically dismantling them by hitting not only the missiles and drones, but also striking the defense industrial base that produces them. The phrase methodically dismantling is doing a considerable amount of operational heavy lifting, because what the military leadership described is not a limited target strike campaign. This is the systematic deletion of an entire military-industrial ecosystem. The satellite imagery emerging from the conflict zone confirms this systematic destruction in stark, undeniable terms. Before and after images of the Parchin military complex, a sprawling compound that for decades housed sensitive nuclear research, missile fuel production, and high explosive testing infrastructure, show a landscape that has been fundamentally altered. Structures that existed in the before images simply do not exist in the after images. Multiple buildings within the same compound were hit with a precision that defense analysts have described as remarkable given the complexity and sensitivity of the target environment. In the same vicinity, broader military infrastructure shows numerous buildings heavily damaged or completely collapsed. The operational detail that is both impressive and sobering is the accuracy of these munitions. The strikes are going precisely to the structures that matter: weapons production buildings, command and control facilities, storage bunkers, while adjacent infrastructure, including roads and non-military buildings, remains visibly untouched. That is not an accident of war. That is a demonstration of intent and capability. Further evidence of this precision emerged from footage of a strike on an Iranian tactical bomber shelter. Analysts scrutinized the footage and were left speechless by the physics involved. The munition did not blast through the reinforced concrete roof of the hardened shelter. Instead, it navigated directly through the narrow opening of the shelter door. The aircraft was inside the structure, partially obscured, and the weapon still found its way through the gap as if guided by a thread. The military command noted afterward that they had every option and capability to simply go through the roof and obliterate the entire structure from above. The decision not to, the decision to thread a precision weapon through a narrow portal rather than applying blunt force, was a deliberate message about what modern precision capabilities look like in actual combat conditions. This is not the carpet bombing of the previous century. This is something entirely different and much more intimidating. The industrial dimension of this campaign is where the strategic logic becomes clearest. The Secretary of Defense made the most important statement of the conflict regarding this objective during a press conference. He stated that soon and very soon all of Iran's defense companies will be destroyed. He clarified that as of 2 days prior, Iran's entire ballistic missile production capacity, every company that builds every component of those missiles, had been functionally defeated and destroyed. Buildings, complexes, and factory lines scattered all across the country were reduced to rubble. The emphasis was placed on ensuring that while existing stockpiles were being shot down or destroyed on the ground, the enemy would have no ability to manufacture more. Let that distinction settle for a moment. The goal is not merely to disarm Iran of the missiles it possesses today. The goal is to deindustrialize Iran's ability to ever produce them again. That is the entire strategic logic of the operation. According to situation reports from defense analysis institutions, by the end of the first 10 days of Operation Epic Fury, United States forces had struck more than 5,000 individual targets across the country. This figure includes more than 50 naval vessels struck and sunk or rendered inoperable. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff confirmed that Iranian theater ballistic missile launches had been reduced by 86% from peak levels, and that one-way attack drone intercepts had fallen by 73%. Those numbers do not merely reflect successful air defense intercepts. They reflect a military machine that is literally running out of things to fire because its factories have been turned to glass and concrete dust. The financial cost of such an immense operation is staggering on both sides. Expert analysis estimated that even the first 100 hours of epic fury cost Washington approximately $3.7 billion. As the campaign progressed, the United States military adapted its approach, shifting from expensive standoff cruise missiles to more cost-effective joint direct attack munitions, which are precision guidance kits that convert conventional unguided bombs into satellite-guided smart weapons. This shift became possible because earlier suppression campaigns had already gutted Iran's integrated air defense network. With the skies relatively uncontested, American aircraft could now fly closer to their targets with dramatically reduced risk. While the bombs are falling, a parallel story of equal drama is unfolding behind closed doors. The president of Iran, the same official who just days prior issued a formal apology to Gulf nations for Iranian attacks, only to have his own military publicly contradict him and force a retraction, has now gone public with his terms for a ceasefire. After confirming conversations with the leaders of Russia and Pakistan, the Iranian president stated that Iran would only agree to end the conflict if three conditions were met. First, Iran's legitimate rights must be recognized. Second, Iran must receive reparations for war damages. And third, Iran must receive guarantees against any future military aggression. These demands are maximalist. They are the demands of a party that believes it is negotiating from a position of strength, or at least one that is trying to project the illusion of such. Yet every piece of empirical military evidence on the ground suggests the exact opposite is true. Iran's ballistic missile launches have collapsed. Its navy is on the bottom of the Persian Gulf. Its missile factories are rubble. Its air defenses are functionally a memory. The gap between the public position and the military reality is extraordinary. What makes the situation genuinely intriguing is that what Iran is saying in public is apparently very different from what it is offering in private back channels. According to diplomatic reporting, during a conversation between the Iranian president and the Russian leader, Moscow brought ceasefire prospects to the attention of the White House. The private offer, as reported, was significant. Iran is reportedly willing to transfer 400 kilograms of its enriched uranium stockpile to Russian custody. This is not an unprecedented arrangement. During the previous nuclear agreement signed in 2015, Russia took physical custody of a large portion of Iran's enriched material as part of the deal's verification mechanism. There is a historical playbook for this. The fact that Iran is now reportedly willing to revisit this arrangement after having flatly refused to relinquish this material during pre-war negotiations, tells you something profound about how Iran's leadership truly assesses their own deteriorating position. However, the United States rejected this offer. The reasoning behind that rejection gets to the very heart of why this conflict started in the first place. Iran is willing to give up the current batch of uranium, but Iran is not willing to give up the centrifuges that make the uranium. It is not willing to dismantle the enrichment infrastructure. It wants to keep the facilities that could, at any future moment of Iran's choosing, produce more enriched uranium. This is precisely the arrangement that the United States and its regional allies have found unacceptable throughout every round of failed negotiations. The technical reality is unforgiving. Iran currently holds uranium enriched to 60% purity. That level of enrichment has absolutely no civilian justification. Nuclear power reactors operate on fuel enriched to 3 to 5%. Medical isotope production requires perhaps 20%. 60% enrichment serves exactly one purpose in a national nuclear program. It is a stepping stone to weapons-grade uranium at 90%. The centrifuges do not care about diplomatic promises, you simply run them longer. The offer, surrender the stockpile but keep the factory, is the nuclear equivalent of agreeing to destroy your current ammunition while retaining the weapons factory and all the machine tools to make more. Washington's answer was a definitive no. While those negotiations sputtered in private, a new development was reshaping the global geography of the conflict. The international coalition now forming around the Strait of Hormuz, The Strait of Hormuz is the single most important maritime choke point on the planet. Roughly 20% of global oil trade and a significant portion of liquefied natural gas passes through those 21 miles of water between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. Iran's parliament voted to close it at the outset of Operation Epic Fury. That vote, even if symbolic, sent oil markets into immediate turbulence. Shipping through the strait slowed to a near standstill, with over 150 freight ships, including numerous oil tankers, stalled in the surrounding waters. The President of the United States addressed this directly in a public statement that served as both a coalition call and a warning. He stated that many countries affected by Iran's attempted closure of the strait will be sending warships in conjunction with the United States to keep the waterway open and safe. He noted that while 100% of Iran's major military capabilities had been destroyed, it remained easy for a diminished adversary to send a drone or two, drop a mine, or deliver a close-range missile somewhere along the waterway. He called on China, France, Japan, South Korea, the United Kingdom, and other nations to contribute naval assets to protect the strait. The list is notable because these are the economies most dependent on Hormuz remaining open. Their supply chains, their energy security, all flow through that narrow strip of water. The response from Europe has been cautiously positive. Senior officials in Paris and London indicated openness to participating in a protective coalition, though formal decisions were pending as they assessed how best to contribute. Japan and South Korea, both heavily dependent on Gulf energy imports, have immense economic incentives to participate. China's position remains the most complex variable. Beijing has deep economic relationships with both Iran and the Gulf states, and has not, as of this analysis, formally committed to coalition participation, though the economic damage of a prolonged closure would cut deeply into Chinese supply chains as well. Amidst the ceasefire negotiations and coalition diplomacy, strikes inside Iran continued with undiminished intensity. Satellite imagery confirmed the complete destruction of a headquarters for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps near the capital. The before and after contrast is unambiguous. What was a functioning military command facility is now a field of craters and twisted steel. The targeting of command infrastructure is not incidental. It is core to the campaign's design. According to analysis of the operation, the United States and Israel struck over 2,000 targets in the opening days, including not just missile bases and production facilities, but also the leadership infrastructure and command nodes tied to strategic weapons programs. There is also a dimension of this conflict that carries a heavy human and judicial weight. The President of the United States addressed the IRGC personnel who participated in the violent suppression of civilian protests. He warned these individuals directly that they will face consequences. He referenced a recent crackdown in which, according to his statement, thousands of civilians were killed by Iranian security forces during the regime's suppression of the largest anti-government protests Iran had seen since 1979. The deliberate targeting of IRGC command infrastructure, combined with public warnings to individuals documented committing atrocities, signals a dimension of this campaign that goes beyond pure military objective destruction. This is also a form of accountability, delivered from the air. Let us look at where this leaves Iran strategically, and why the situation is more precarious than any of Tehran's public statements suggest. At peak intensity during the opening days of Operation Epic Fury, Iran fired hundreds of ballistic missiles and more than 800 drones in the first 48 hours. Iranian strikes targeted Gulf Arab states as well as Israel and United States military facilities across the region. Against the Gulf states alone, the volume of fire was staggering. Yet the intercept rates achieved by multi-layer air defense architectures were equally staggering, with success rates hovering around 90 to 95% for incoming threats. The damage done was real in some locations, but the overwhelming majority of Iranian firepower was neutralized before reaching its intended targets. Crucially, that firepower is now running out. The factories that produce those weapons are destroyed. The specialized human capital that knew how to build them is gone. The supply chains feeding those facilities have been severed. Iran cannot sustain this rate of expenditure and it cannot replenish its losses. The picture that emerges from all of this intelligence is of a regime caught between an impossible public position and a collapsing military reality. In public, Iran demands recognition, reparations, and guarantees. In private, it is reportedly offering to hand over its enriched uranium stockpile. Its president apologizes for attacking neighbors, then walks the apology back under pressure from his own hardline military apparatus. This is a regime under extreme stress. The question that every analyst in Washington, Jerusalem, Moscow, and Beijing is now trying to answer is, what does that stress ultimately produce? Will it lead to a negotiated retreat, or will it lead to something even more desperate? The answer to that question will depend significantly on the diplomatic window, if one ever opens. The United States' position has been consistent. The objective is to ensure Iran can never acquire a nuclear weapon, cannot rebuild its missile arsenal, and cannot sustain a regional proxy network. The Secretary of State put it simply: Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, and we will not allow Iran to hide behind the immunity of a massive short-term ballistic missile inventory. That is a maximalist objective. Iran's minimum public position is recognition, reparations, and guarantees. Those two floors do not obviously overlap. What Russia's role matters in this is that Moscow sees an opportunity to play mediator and extract diplomatic value from a conflict it did not start and cannot fully control. Whether that opportunity leads anywhere depends on whether there is an overlap between what Iran is willing to give up privately and what the United States will accept. What we are witnessing right now is a military and geopolitical earthquake whose aftershocks will reshape the Middle East for decades. Operation Epic Fury is not a limited strike. It is a systematic campaign to permanently alter the military balance in the region by dismantling the institutional foundations of Iranian military power. The United States has deployed a level of precision that it has arguably never deployed in a real-world combat environment at this scale. A strike through a hangar opening rather than through the roof, satellite imagery of craters in neat rows on hardened facilities, ballistic missile attack volumes down nearly 90% in under 2 weeks. Through all of it, the diplomatic signal remains consistent. As was stated at the original briefing for Operation Midnight Hammer, Iran has a choice. The line regarding nuclear capabilities has been drawn. The question is whether the leadership in Tehran, pressed between the maximum pressure of an unprecedented military campaign and the internal pressure of a population that has been rising against them, can find a way to a peace that the United States and its allies will accept. The world is watching. The next hours and days will likely define the strategic reality of the region for the next generation.